The U.S. National Team January Camp 2024 roster is out, and there are a lot of question marks. Let's get into it. So as I put the roster up here, so I don't just drone on and read off all the 25 names, just the macro thoughts are that by nature, the January Camp is experimental and it's inexperienced. Even using that as a grading curve, this roster is extremely experimental and extremely inexperienced. 17 of the 25 players do not yet have a senior cap. There's a handful of players who I read the roster and thought, I don't really think that person has a chance at even the Olympics, let alone Copa America or any one of these tournaments. Not to be too, I guess, mean to some of these. These are all, you can't take away national team call-ups, but this is not the strongest group of players. Greg Berhalter and the staff obviously prioritized the Olympics, and I think that was the correct decision. Everything that you look at with this roster comes down to Olympics, and it's a U23 tournament, but every team gets to have 3 overage players. Whether one of those 3 will come from this squad, because there's guys like Brian White and Jackson Reagan and a couple others who are over 23 that could be called into that, remains to be seen, because a lot of teams like to do kind of more impact players. These are kind of fringe pool guys, and quite honestly, there are some players on this roster who aren't even fringe pool guys. So that's going to be interesting to kind of watch. With these 25, there are 3 players on the squad who have made more than 10 appearances for the national team. It's at the point where the first kind of thought is the January Camp roster, is this a thing that makes sense in 2024? I would need a little bit of a bigger sample size to move on from the January Camp, but this, again, is not the strongest roster. But that doesn't mean that there are a lot of good players. There's a lot of young players. There's a lot of opportunities for players to play themselves into the Olympics, and a handful of these players might have the chance to play for the Copa America team. So let's start with that. Kind of, we'll go at the top end about maybe the guys that you'd be looking at for the Copa America squad or bigger tournaments, and then we'll go to the top line here in terms of players who could impact the first team or something closer to the first team for the national team here. It is pretty simple and pretty obvious for me. It starts with Miles Robinson, of course, new FC Cincinnati player. He's been a regular team. He probably would have been on the World Cup squad if he didn't get hurt. Another player probably a little bit on the bubble is James Sands. He's not, as high up as, say, Miles Robinson is in this group, in this team. But those are 2 players that you look for forward. Some of the rising guys like John Tolkien and Caleb Wiley are virtual locks for the Olympic team. The only way that they wouldn't be is if one, either or both, plays himself into the Copa America squad or whatever, because backup left back is pretty wide open and a pretty, open committee here for players to kind of put themselves forward. So I think off the top of my head and the initial reactions here, for what matters long term, it's those guys. Caleb Wiley and John Tolkien are obviously younger. Wiley, the youngest of that trio. Tolkien and Wiley being Olympic age eligible for the Olympics. Some other guys who could kind of project there. Aiden Morris, Jack McGlynn. McGlynn has, an elite skill in terms of his passing that left foot. If his athleticism gets there, he can impact the game international level. He was very, very good at the U20 World Cup. It didn't limit him there. There were some other players on that U20 World Cup squad that did kind of, pretty clear that they needed more athleticism. Another guy's Diego Luna, who I had a few question marks going into that U20 World Cup, and he was awesome, and he was even better for Real Salt Lake down the stretch. And that's another player. Cade Cowell, another U20 standout. These are kind of the guys who you're looking at for the national team in the future. Cade Cowell, by the way, he has 8 caps. That's 3rd most in this roster, it's just pretty crazy to me in general. Just there's so much experimentation. A couple of the veterans here, DeJuan Jones, I thought that he should have been called up a while ago. Some of these goalkeepers are very interesting. Patrick Schulte, Drake Callender, Roman Celentano. When we go into this new era, the U.S. national team is well stocked at the goalkeeper position. Starts with Matt Turner as a starter. Then there's Gago Sonina. There's Chris Brady. There's a ton of other options, including Callender, Celentano, and Schulte. And I think it'll be fascinating to see which of those 3 gets the start in this friendly of the January Camp, because that would show me who is most likely at having the inside track at either being on the Olympics or, what their long-term view is in the playing pool. With the Olympics, again, that's probably what's going to be the most consequential part of this roster, is what players are going to play themselves into the Olympic roster. I'm going to start here with guys who I think, again, are virtual locks. I've already talked about Caleb Wiley and John Tolkien. That's the left back starting spot. That those 2 players are fighting for regular minutes for the Olympic team if they're not with the senior team, if they don't kind of progress in that. Some other guys I think who are virtual locks for this Olympic team would be Jack McGlynn, it'd be Cade Cowell, Diego Luna, like Duncan McGuire. These are guys who are more likely to be starters on that team, I think, than miss the roster. But again, it depends on what 3 overage players are used. Like, I think Duncan McGuire is likely to be the starter for the national team for the United States at the Olympics. But that could change if the United States decides to use one of their exemptions, overage exemptions, on a center forward. Center forward and center back are the 2 spots that are probably the weakest and the most shallow. And that's where I'd assume Greg Berhalter and his staff would use the overage exemptions. And a couple from this January camp, center backs, Jackson Reagan, Nkosi, and Tafari, they have yet to make their debut with the national team, unlike somebody like Miles Robinson. They're not age eligible for the Olympics, but this shows me that maybe they're under consideration for the exemptions, right? Like, I'm surprised that a player like Julian Gressel isn't in this group, right? Daniel Edelman is another U20 standout. Like, I think that speaks volumes of where the coaching staff thinks of some of these players. But again, like somebody like Gressel or Paul Areola, for instance, or Christian Roldan, like, does this mean that these guys aren't really in contention to be some of those overage players at the Olympics? I don't know. So, and I'm super interested. One guy kind of haven't hit, 2 guys I haven't hit on yet, really, is Bernard Kumungo and Brian White. I might be the biggest fan of New Jersey, Mario Gomez and Brian White. I'm very happy for him that he's getting this opportunity with the national team. The dude scores goals. I do think it's an outside looking in terms of him being one of those overage additions to the Olympic squad, or him breaking into that, center forward depth chart ahead of, some of the options. But look, man, I hope that he gets his debut with the national team in January. Who knows what will or what will not come from it. But again, you cannot take away an international cap from a player. And look, just because he's not going to be the starting center forward at the World Cup doesn't mean that this is useless and doesn't mean anything. So again, I think it's cool to see some of these players get recognized for what they've done throughout their career and what they can do and their skill and their ability. Another few players before I get out of here. AZ Jackson, St. Louis City. He's a young rising player. He's somebody who's likely to be in Europe in the near future, or maybe not near future, the midterm future. There are a lot of teams interested in the St. Louis player. He's a winger. Again, it's an uphill battle given all the talent in the attack and all the young talent in the attack with this national team. So I'm very curious to see where all this shakes up, and I'm going to try to put out a projected XI, a favorite XI, I think, if I were to be picking the squad for this game in the January camp. The U.S. national team plays Slovenia on January 20th, a classic January camp friendly. Obviously, outside of a window, it won't be Slovenia's first team either. Who knows what we'll learn, but this is the starting XI that I would like to see. Patrick Schulte in goal, Shaq Moore, Miles Robinson, James Sands, John Tolkien on the back line, Aiden Morris and Jack McGlynn as a double pivot, Cade Cowell, Diego Luna, Bernard Kumungo in the attacking 3, whether you call that 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1, whatever, and Duncan McGuire up top. Look, I know Shaq Moore isn't the most sexy here, but like, you need to have a couple veterans in there to be the control group for some of these experiments. Like, I don't know how much you learn about Bernard Kumungo if everybody else is experimenting, right? You need some of these constants and some of these, again, some of these control. Sorry, I'm using a science term, big science guy. So yeah, that's kind of the 11 I'd like to see. Diego Luna as a 10. I could see him playing on the wing, and you could add another central midfielder, whether that's Josh Atencio or Tim Tillman. Again, personally, I'd like to see it be more of a 4-2-3-1, and Luna in that Gio Reyna role for with the first team. I would like to see Gio Reyna kind of stay as a number 10. So I do hope to see it at 4-2-3-1-ish, 4-3-3-ish with Luna as the 10 in the system. Duncan McGuire up top because I think, I'd be good with Brian White starting as well. I just went on a rant about how happy I am for him and how he deserves this. But Duncan McGuire is age eligible for the Olympics. Start him here is probably where I'd lean. That's how I break the tie. I would like to see Brian White come off the bench and get a decent run because you can't really play both together. They're both, traditional number 9s, and in the system, they just play with one number 9. I think Bernard Kumungo, I don't think that I mentioned him enough in, potential for the Olympics. Like, he's super interesting because he can play center forward or on the wing. He's dynamic. He's direct. He can score goals. That's a useful player to have in a group like this. Like, imagine you're down 2-1 in the 75th minute. You look at the bench. Kumungo would make a lot of sense to bring in again if he's not a starter. Some other players I'd like to see. Drake Callender kind of come off the bench for Patrick Schulte. Again, the same McGuire, Brian White thing here. Schulte is age eligible for the Olympics. And goalie isn't going to be a spot where Greg Berhalter would need to bring in an overage player because, again, there's Gaga Slonina, Chris Brady, Patrick Schulte, I think should be the three if there are three goalkeepers. But again, Drake Callender is a really good option. I think that he should get his national team debut here. Again, Miles Robinson, we've talked about him before. James Sands, these are guys that are playing more for the pool for the first team than the Olympics or anything like that. I'd like to see Jackson Reagan and Kosi Tafari. Kosi Tafari is another guy I haven't talked enough about yet. He's awesome. He's both of those two, Reagan and Tafari, were really good MLS center backs this year. Don't know what that means for their international future, but again, like it's cool to see them get this opportunity. And hey, maybe they never break a Gold Cup squad even, but look, like they deserve to be in this camp, particularly with the lack of options for other players. Again, Josh Atencio and AZ Jackson, I'd like to see kind of come in off the bench as well. So that's the projected 11. As the years have gone by, I've cared less and less about the January camp, and particularly so when I saw this roster. It's not very strong. I don't know. A handful of these guys, could break into either the first team, the Olympic side, whatever. Like, look, this isn't the biggest thing. If they win 3-0, if they lose 1-0, it's not the best thing or the worst thing in the world. I think that we have a tendency to get too caught up in some of these results. Like, I don't really think it matters. Like, again, I think that they should be crushed if they lose or don't play so well. But again, like, how many of these players are going to be regulars for the team? How many of these players will be on the squad for the Copa America? 1, 2, maybe 3. How many of these will be Olympics? Like, that's how this all needs to be framed. And again, that doesn't mean that we can't criticize if things don't go well, and we can't praise if things do go well. But I think that you just need to put all of this into perspective of, like, it's not anywhere near the A team. So, it's cool for a run out, but don't get carried away one way or the other. So that's it for this today. I should be back later today with some breaking news, or tomorrow morning. I don't know. We'll see. I got a lot of phone calls to make, so I'm gonna go pick up the old cell phone, the old Black Mirror, and get after it.